Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please make sure the volume of this podcast is set perfectly to your listening enjoyment. Please take your seat, whether that's on the treadmill, car, sofa, or bed, and buckle in for the last trip. My name is Jamie Beebe, and I'll be your tour guide, recreating someone's last days in paradise. On behalf of myself and everyone behind the scenes, please enjoy the Last Trip podcast. And because nobody likes a long flight to get to where they want to be, let's prepare for takeoff. On a summer night in 1996, the Paradise Island of Bermuda revealed its darkest side. Rebecca Middleton was just 17 years old, on the trip of a lifetime with her best friend, when a chance encounter shattered everything. What should have been sun-drenched days of beaches and laughter turned into one of the most brutal and baffling murders the island had ever seen. But the horror of Rebecca's death was only the beginning. What followed was a twisted path of botched investigations, lost evidence, and a justice system that seemed unwilling or unable to deliver the truth. Nearly 3 decades later, the scars of that night still linger, raising questions about power, corruption, and the uneasy shadows that hide behind picture-perfect beauty. Today, we're stepping into the mystery of Bermuda's most famous unsolved crime, where innocence met violence, and where justice slipped away into the tide. Before we dive into the events that forever changed Rebecca's story, let's step back in time. Let's return to Bermuda in the summer of 1996. The island where turquoise waters kissed pink sand, where narrow winding roads led to hidden coves, and where Rebecca arrived with all the joy and freedom of youth. To truly understand what happened, we first need to understand the place itself. The paradise that promised safety and adventure, but would instead become the backdrop to tragedy. Imagine stepping off the small plane in Bermuda in the mid-90s. The air is thick with salt and humidity. The sun drops gold across the coral pavements. Pastel houses with white-roofed gables cluster around harbors. Boats in aquamarine bays and lush green hills rise steeply from the sea. In 1996, Bermuda was already steeped in colonial legacy, settled by the English in the early 17th century, officially in 1612 after the wreck of the Sea Venture off St. George's Reef in 1609. The island carries layers of history in every stone wall and fortification. St. George's, where Rebecca was staying, is one of the oldest towns in the English New World. Its cobblestone streets, ancient churches, shadowed alcoves, and forts, like Fort Victoria and Fort Albert, tell of centuries of British garrisons, trade routes, colonial politics, and also of people. Enslaved Africans, indentured servants, seafaring captains. Hamilton, the capital, is more compact than many capitals. It has British influence in its governmental architecture, its legal systems, and institutions. Lawyers in suits, judges wearing traditional British robes, even wigs in certain courts, cricket matches, afternoon teas, all these small rituals of an empire still very present. The people of Bermuda are a blend. African heritage, many descended from slaves brought from the Caribbean or Africa. British colonial settlers, Portuguese immigrant influence, and more recent arrivals. The culture reflects that mixture in everything: speech, food, music. Bermudian English has its own accent, rhythm, and local phrases. The music in Bermuda is alive. You'll hear reggae and calypso, but you'll also hear gombe drumming. The booming bass drums, sharp snare whistles, the dancers in vibrant masquerade costumes. It's a tradition passed down in families. When they perform, it's ritual and celebration both. They use religious themes, biblical imagery, masked movement, storytelling, and communal energy. Food, too, is a story of ocean and empire. Fresh fish is everywhere. fish chowder seasoned with curry powder, an echo of West Indian spice, and local peppers, often with rum or sherry pepper sauce. Salted codfish, banana, potatoes at breakfast. And rum always plays a part. There's rum swizzle, dark and stormy, flavors that are strong, sweet, sharp, and comforting. And tourism in 1996 was still quite vibrant. Over 500,000 visitors came that year. It was a high point in many respects. Yet, even then, signs of decline were just around the corner. By 2000, visitor numbers dropped significantly. People came to swim, sail, and snorkel. They explored caves, like the Crystal Caves just south of Hamilton, one of Bermuda's natural miracles. Limestone formations, stalactites, clear pools, subterranean waters, all eerie and beautiful. They visited historical sites, like the old town of St. George's, the State House, which is one of the oldest surviving stone buildings in Bermuda, Ordnance Island, Fort St. Catherine with its view over pink sand beaches, deep forts, and sea-sprayed ramparts. They walked along cobbled streets, visited museums, like the St. George's Historical Society Museum, Featherbed Alley Print Shop, or small cottage-style homes turned exhibits, showing colonial kitchens, tools, domestic life from centuries before. They made trips out to nature preserves, Cooper's Island, Tobacco Bay Beach, small coral reefs teeming with fish, beaches with soft white sand, hidden coves, lush forests, and citrus-smelling trails. Even the architecture itself was an activity for the eye. Pastel facades, white limestone roofs, ornate balconies, narrow streets shaded by trees and vines, posts of iron, verandas hanging with bougainvillea, sunlight bouncing off water into every window. Imagine evenings cooling off, warm breeze carrying that mix of salt, gardenia, and cedar, children playing near the docks, music from windows, laughter from taverns. Nights there are quieter than big cities, but still alive. It's soft hums rather than a roar. There are cave tours, moonlight drives, sailing among reefs, exploring shipwrecks, snorkeling in shallow reefs, flora walks behind beaches, discovering hidden gardens, museums tucked into old colonial homes, churches with cedar beams, and graveyards with weathered tombstones. Bermuda really is a one-of-a-kind, amazing place to visit. But there are shadows, too. The beauty of the island often masked the complexities, the inequalities, social tensions, colonial legacies. The legal systems were British in structure, but the lived experience for many Bermudians included the scars of history. Now, 1996, Bermuda's tourism was its third largest industry. People depended on it. But when a high-profile crime, like Rebecca's murder, erupted, the consequences for perception, for trust, and for safety, they were profound. When Rebecca was there in 1996, this was the Bermuda she saw. An island of beauty, history, color, rhythm, but also a place where the promise of paradise could be fragile, where the night could hide danger, where justice was promised but not always delivered. Rebecca was so much more than the victim she is often remembered as. And to understand the weight of her story, we first need to know who she was. The daughter, the friend, the sister, and the bright spirit whose light was stolen far too soon. Rebecca Jane Middleton was born on June 27, 1979, in Belleville, Ontario, to Cindy and Dave Middleton. From her earliest days, she carried a spirit of restlessness, of movement, of joy. The youngest of two older brothers, Matthew and Mark, and older to two step-siblings from her mother's second marriage, she knew how to stand her ground, but also how to belong. Her family called her a tomboy, and that fit. She loved the rough and tumble of life outdoors, sailing across the water, carving paths through snow on skis, launching softballs under the hot summer sun. She played piano, but only when the mood struck her. Not for fame or perfect recitals. Music fed something in her, and she marched to her own rhythm. In school, Rebecca was steady and capable, a good student, as people remember. Not overly flashy in academics, but reliable, curious, polite, determined in her own way. She had friends in every corner of her life, teammates from the local community league, people in her neighborhood, companions for sleepovers, movie outings, family dinners. In all of it, she carried warmth. Her smile came easily, and her laughter came readily. She worked at a local gas station. Many said it was the perfect first job for her. A place where she was known, where she greeted people with kindness, helpful hands, and a generosity of spirit. She understood people. She knew how to make others feel seen. Her energy was balanced by care. She had fun, she was outgoing, but she was also street smart, a cautious adventurer. Her parents often said they felt she was self-aware enough that they didn't spend sleepless nights worrying that she would drift into trouble. She seemed grounded in home, in family. Even after her parents' divorce when she was 13, she preserved strong, loving relationships with both Cindy and Dave, and got along well with her step-siblings. In the summer, just before her 17th birthday, she was more alive than ever with plans. After completing 11th grade, she and her best friend since age 6, Jasmine Means, were to spend 6 weeks in Bermuda. The two had been inseparable since they met, more like sisters than friends. And this trip was to be their great escape. Beaches, sunshine, new scenes, photos, laughter. They'd be staying with Jasmine's father, Rick Means, in flats. And the adults felt assured there would be safety, supervision, yet enough freedom for 2 girls on vacation. Rebecca's birthday on June 27th would be celebrated in that tropical air. The island's salt smell and heat and ocean pulling at their senses. Rebecca arrived in Bermuda with dreams. She planned to explore, to sail, to swim, to take photos, to soak up everything the island promised. She carried with her not just luggage, but hopes that time would stretch, that it would expand her life in ways Bellevue could only hint at. Rebecca's story is one of joy, adventure, and the promise of youth. But it's also one cut short in a way no family should ever endure. Because just weeks after arriving in Bermuda, the island paradise that was meant to be her summer escape became the setting of her final hours. So we now turn to the facts, the timeline of that trip in July 1996, when Rebecca Middleton's life was stolen, and justice would slip through the cracks. Rebecca and Jasmine had been waiting for this trip all year. They packed their bags with the giddy excitement only teenagers can have, shoving in swimsuits, shorts, and the kind of outfits they'd wear for photos they'd laugh about later. Even on the plane, the excitement spilled out of them. They snapped photos mid-flight, grinning at each other, already dreaming of beaches, warm nights, and freedom. It was June 20th, 1996, when Rebecca set out from Canada to the island of Bermuda, a 6-week adventure. She was at a sweet spot in life, when everything feels wide open, when every moment seems like it could be the start of something big. The girls were staying with Jasmine's father and his wife in flats. Now Rick set rules to make sure the girls would stay safe. No wandering off late at night, no mopeds or motorbikes, way too dangerous and too many accidents. And if they ever needed a ride, they were to call him. He'd rather lose some sleep than risk anything happening to them. Once they were settled in, the girls began exploring the island. They toured Hamilton, Bermuda's capital city, with its pastel buildings, narrow streets, and the hum of island life all around them. In St. George's, they wandered cobbled lanes that felt worlds away from their Canadian hometown, soaking in the history, the heat, the freedom of being somewhere new and far from home. By June 25th, the island nightlife began to lure them in. They found themselves at the White Horse Tavern, a popular spot in St. George's, where locals and tourists mingled under the pulse of music and chatter. It was there that they met 3 teenage boys vacationing from the UK, Russell McCann, Ben Turtle, and Jonathan Cassidy. New friends, maybe even summer crushes, entered the orbit of their vacation. The very next night, June 26th, the group crossed paths again, this time in Hamilton. The easy magic of teenage summer settled in. Laughter, drinks, shy glances, promises of meeting again. Plans were made for July 2nd, a boat trip to Hawkins Island, a secret spot for more drinks, more dancing, and more memories. When June 27th arrived, it was Rebecca's birthday. She turned 17 that day, and the Means family hosted a celebration for her. Cake, laughter, a moment of brightness. That night, she sat down to write letters to her parents, one for each of them. Letters filled with thoughts she wanted to share, plans she wanted to put into words. They were meant to be mailed later, keepsakes of her trip, tokens of her love. But those letters would never be sent. On July 2nd, the weather shifted. Storms rolled in. The trip to Hawkins Island was scrapped, so the teens changed plans. Instead, they decided to meet again at the White Horse Tavern. Rick and his wife dropped Rebecca and Jasmine off in St. George's around 7 p.m. By 7:30, the girls were reunited with their new friends, the night unfolding in music, drinks, and the sweet recklessness of youth. When the White Horse closed, the party carried on at Jonathan Cassidy's nearby house. There were more drinks, more laughter, and the kind of clumsy teenage flirting that felt, in the moment, like the most important thing in the world. But time slipped away faster than they realized. The curfew set by Rick, 1 a.m., came and went. At 1:08 a.m., Jasmine phoned for a taxi. The dispatcher promised one would come, but it never arrived. Too nervous to wake Rick and risk his disappointment, and too wary of confessing they'd been drinking, the girls decided to try again. Another call, still no taxi. At 2:16 a.m., yet another call. Still nothing. By now the party had dwindled. The house was quiet. The other teens had gone to bed. Rebecca and Jasmine stepped outside into the humid darkness, with rain lightly falling. They stood at the end of the driveway, straining to spot headlights, trying and failing to hail passing taxis. Their laughter was now replaced by unease. Around 3 a.m., a motorbike pulled up. The rider was Dean Lattimore, a young man who stopped to ask what the girls were doing outside at such an hour. His tone was casual, but there was an edge. He told them they should be careful. A few minutes later, another motorbike arrived, carrying two men, Justice Smith, 17 years old, and Kirk Mundy, 21. While they were known to Dean, they weren't riding with him. Rather, it was just a chance encounter. At first, nothing seemed off. They were chatting, joking, trying to pass the time. But Jasmine noticed something unsettling. One of the men kept playing with Rebecca's necklace, as a piece of jewelry Jasmine herself had given her. Now, eventually the men offered the girls a ride. And it wasn't an easy choice. They knew it wasn't safe to accept a lift from strangers. So they hesitated. But with no taxis, no cabs stopping, and no easy way home, their options felt cornered. Against their instincts, they agreed. Jasmine climbed onto Dean's motorbike. Rebecca climbed onto the other one with Justice and Kirk. The engines roared to life, headlights slicing through the wet dark. Jasmine, uneasy, clutched Dean tightly, pleading for him to slow down. And he did, but the other motorbike, the one carrying Rebecca, sped up. Then it veered off, a different road, a different direction. Within seconds, they were gone. When Jasmine finally arrived home around 3:45 a.m., she expected to see Rebecca waiting, but she wasn't there. Jasmine searched the house. She waited a few minutes. Fear rose in her chest like a tide. Finally, she woke her father. They climbed into the car and drove through the rain-slicked streets, calling Rebecca's name, headlights searching in the dark. And meanwhile, around 3:30 a.m., a man named Dana Rawlings was driving home after a night DJing at a local club. Ferry Reach Road was nearly deserted, dimly lit, the kind of place where silence feels heavy. His headlights caught something ahead, a shape on the ground. Now, at first glance, he thought it was roadkill, but something gnawed at him, urging him to stop. When he pulled over, the truth tore through the night. It was Rebecca, and she was barely alive, her body broken, bleeding, struggling to hold on. Her eyes met his, tears streaking down her face, and she tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her body trembled, she was cold, soaked with blood and rainwater. Dana knelt beside her, pressing his hands to her wounds, whispering that help was coming, that she'd be okay. His friends sprinted to a phone booth to call for an ambulance. This was 1996, long before cell phones could have bridged the gap, especially in that part of the world. But the damage was already too much. Rebecca had been stabbed over 30 times. She had been raped and sodomized. Her body bore the marks of violence no one should ever endure. And she had lost too much blood. By the time the sirens pierced the night, her life was slipping away. She died right there in the wet dark of Ferry Reach Road, far from home, far from the safety of her parents. And back at the Means home, Rick and Jasmine phoned the police to report Rebecca missing. But before they could explain, the officer cut them off and told them to go to Ferry Reach Road. Dread clamped down on them as they drove. Silence was heavy in the car. When they arrived, yellow tape fluttered in the headlights, police lights flashing. Rick told Jasmine to stay in the car. He walked forward, toward the officers, toward the body bag lying on the ground. Officers asked him to confirm the identity of the girl inside. He did. It was Rebecca, his daughter's best friend, lifeless, beaten, and gone. The autopsy confirmed what the scene had already revealed. Rebecca died of shock and massive blood loss from her injuries. Her body bore 35 stab wounds. She had fought, but she was overpowered. The Paradise Island had turned into a nightmare, one that would only grow darker as the investigation began. Rick had to do the unthinkable. He had to pick up the phone and call Rebecca's parents back in Canada, her mom Cindy, her dad David, and tell them their daughter's life had been brutally and senselessly taken while on vacation. A trip that was meant to be full of laughter, freedom, and teenage memories. A trip where Rebecca was supposed to be safe. A trip where Rick had promised to look out for the girls. For Rebecca's parents, the words didn't land at first. They didn't make sense. This wasn't the kind of call anyone expects to get. Their daughter, their bright, adventurous 17-year-old girl, was gone. Murdered in the most savage way imaginable. Shock gave way to confusion, and then grief so deep it would never leave them. Their world shattered that night. It would never be the same again. In Bermuda, police wasted no time questioning Jasmine about what happened. She was terrified, but she told them the truth, that she and Rebecca had accepted a lift from strangers on motorcycles, and that she had been separated from Rebecca in the dark, that she never saw her best friend again. Investigators quickly honed in on suspects. Dean Lattimore, the man who had given Jasmine a ride, was found and questioned. He told police about the two others, the men who had taken Rebecca away on the second motorbike, Justice Smith and Kirk Mundy. And it didn't stop there. Another witness came forward and gave a chilling statement. He had seen the two young men, their clothes stained with blood, near the very spot where Rebecca's body was discovered. And he also identified them as Justice and Kirk. The case seemed open and shut. And soon the medical examiner had something even more damning. DNA recovered from Rebecca's body. DNA that could prove who had raped her, and possibly who had killed her. But this is where the case took a devastating turn, because instead of waiting for the results, Bermuda police made a decision that would unravel any hope of true justice. Now, they convinced themselves that Justice was the main perpetrator, that he had been the one to rape and kill Rebecca, and that Kirk was only an accomplice. So they struck a deal. They offered Kirk a plea bargain in exchange for his testimony against Justice. On July 10th, 1996, police arrested both men. Justice was charged with premeditated murder. Kirk was charged only as an accessory. This despite the fact that Kirk was already facing charges for an armed robbery of a bank vehicle the year before, a crime for which he would later serve 16 years. Then, on October 16th, Kirk formally accepted the plea deal. He admitted to being an accessory to Rebecca's murder and was sentenced to just 5 years in prison. But when DNA evidence finally came back, it revealed the unthinkable. The DNA didn't belong to Justice. It belonged to Kirk, the man who had just been given a lenient sentence, the man who had secured his freedom with a plea bargain. It was a colossal mistake, a catastrophic failure of justice, because once that deal was signed, there was no undoing it. Kirk had effectively secured immunity from the most serious charges. 2 years later, in 1998, new forensic evidence confirmed Kirk's role in the violent sexual assault. Prosecutors tried to charge him with murder after all, but Britain's highest legal authority, the Privy Council, ruled against it. Double jeopardy applied. Kirk could never be tried for Rebecca's murder again. And what about Justice? Well, he went to trial in 1998, but with the DNA pointing squarely at Kirk, the case against him crumbled. His defense shifted the blame, arguing that Kirk had been the perpetrator. And the judge ultimately instructed the jury to acquit, saying there simply wasn't enough evidence to convict. 2 men, 2 attackers, and in the end, neither would face justice for the brutal rape and murder of 17-year-old Rebecca Middleton. Now, of course, the outrage was immediate. How could this happen? How could the system fail so completely? Rebecca's family, her parents, her brothers, her friends, well, they refused to give up. They filed appeals, petitions, begged for new charges. They pushed for aggravated assault, sexual assault, kidnapping, anything that could bring her killers back to court. But one by one, every effort was denied. In March 2006, Bermuda's Director of Public Prosecutions formally ruled out any possibility of fresh charges. And later that year, Rebecca's mother, Cindy, applied for compensation for the trauma caused by the police's catastrophic mishandling of the case. She asked for $100,000. What she got instead was $2,840. The insult cut almost as deep as the loss. In April 2007, human rights lawyer Sherry Booth, the wife of former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, personally argued for Kirk and Justice to be retried. But once again, Bermuda's Chief Justice refused. Rebecca's killers had slipped through every crack in the system. So, I'm sure you're wondering, where are they now? Well, in 2017, Kirk Mundy was deported back to Jamaica after completing his prison sentence for armed robbery, and his measly 5 years for being an accessory to Rebecca's murder. He served longer time for robbing a van than for raping and stabbing a young girl 35 times. Today, he's free, walking the streets of Jamaica. As for Justice, he never even faced charges for Rebecca's death. In 2003, he was arrested for attacking another woman with a weapon outside a nightclub. For that, he was given just 18 months in prison. So now, he too is walking free. The Middleton family's grief has never ended, but they found ways to keep Rebecca's name alive. Her brothers gave their daughters middle names, Rebecca and Jane, in her honor. Jasmine, her best friend who survived that night, did the same for her own daughter. And Dana Rollins, the man who found Rebecca on the roadside, who held her hand as her life slipped away, well, he named his daughter Rebecca too. Because in the end, that's all anyone could do. Just honor her memory, keep her name alive, and remind the world that justice was never truly served for Rebecca Middleton. Rebecca Middleton's death is remembered as one of Bermuda's darkest chapters. A brutal killing that left the island reeling, and the botched investigation that followed cast a long shadow over the island's justice system. For years after her murder in 1996, Bermuda saw a drop in tourism. Families canceled their trips. Couples chose other islands for their honeymoons. And many openly boycotted, believing that a gross miscarriage of justice had taken place. Rebecca's father has long said he believes the powers that be in Bermuda were more concerned with protecting the island's reputation than securing justice for his daughter. In his own words, "The legal system is a joke, and almost everyone in Bermuda was so embarrassed by what happened in the courts." But even in the middle of his grief, David was struck by the kindness he encountered from everyday Bermudians, shopkeepers, neighbors, people he barely knew. Many of them reached out to comfort him, to share his loss, to make sure he never felt alone on the island. He said, "I was there often enough to develop some real friends who really helped me out and made me feel at home. That was much appreciated." Now, decades later, he believes not enough has changed, and his words serve as a reminder to travelers. Paradise isn't always what it seems, and even in the most beautiful places, caution matters. Bermuda today is known for its pastel-colored houses, pink sand beaches, and turquoise water. It's one of the most picturesque destinations in the Atlantic, a place that draws visitors with its blend of British charm and island ease. But like anywhere else in the world, tourists are vulnerable. Sometimes because they're lulled into thinking nothing bad could ever happen in such a perfect place. Now, if you visit Bermuda, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, transportation. Bermuda is small, but it's not always easy to get around. Mopeds are popular rentals, but locals will tell you they can be dangerous, especially for first-time riders on those winding, unfamiliar roads. Rebecca's host family was so concerned about this that they set a rule forbidding the girls from using them. Taxis are available, but can be limited at night. Just like the night Rebecca and Jasmine called for a cab 3 times, and nothing ever came. Today, visitors are advised to pre-book their rides if they plan on staying out late, or better yet, arrange for a safe, reliable driver ahead of time. Now, second, curfews and boundaries. Jasmine's dad also set strict rules about when the girls needed to be home. While that might sound restrictive for teenagers, it's advice that still holds weight today. Staying out past midnight in unfamiliar areas can leave you vulnerable, especially if you're waiting alone for transportation. Plan your evenings with a safety net. Know your route back. Keep a charged phone with local emergency numbers saved, and always let someone know where you are. Third, social settings. Bermuda is generally safe, but like anywhere with nightlife, alcohol lowers inhibitions and can cloud judgment. If you're drinking, stick with your group, avoid leaving with strangers, and trust your instincts if something feels off. Rebecca and Jasmine were simply being friendly teenagers when they accepted help from men on motorbikes. But what felt like the only option that night turned into the decision that sealed Rebecca's fate. Finally, awareness. Bermuda is not a high-crime destination, but we know crime exists everywhere. Theft can happen in crowded areas. Assaults can happen in isolated ones. Be mindful of your surroundings, especially late at night. Travel in groups whenever possible. And never feel pressured into accepting a ride, an invitation, or even just company. If your gut tells you otherwise, listen to it. Rebecca Middleton's story is a reminder that the line between paradise and tragedy can be thinner than we think. Her case was more than just a horrific crime. It became a warning. A story that, for a time, reshaped how the world viewed Bermuda. But it's also a story of resilience and the kindness of ordinary Bermudians who stepped in when her family needed support most. For travelers today, Bermuda remains a stunning place to visit. The island offers history, culture, and unmatched natural beauty. But Rebecca's legacy whispers through its pink sands. Be cautious, be prepared, and never take safety for granted. Rebecca Middleton was just 17 years old when her life was stolen on what should have been the adventure of a lifetime. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend whose laughter and curiosity should have carried her far into the future. Instead, her name became tied to a case defined not only by unimaginable violence, but also by failures in a system that was supposed to deliver justice. Her family's fight never truly ended. They carried Rebecca's memory through every courtroom door, every appeal, every petition. Not because it would bring her back, but because they believed her life mattered, and that her story deserved the truth. Because even decades later, the wounds remain. Bermuda remembers Rebecca. Her family and friends keep her spirit alive through their children, passing her name down from one generation to the next. A promise that she'll never be forgotten. Stories like Rebecca's remind us how fragile life is and how deeply injustice can echo. They ask us to pay attention, to speak up when something isn't right, and to demand better. Whether that's for ourselves, for our communities, or for strangers we'll never meet. Now, if Rebecca's story moved you, share it. Keep her name alive. And when you travel, when you move through the world, carry with you both her sense of adventure and the hard-earned reminder to stay aware, stay safe, and look out for each other. Because in the end, remembering Rebecca is more than recounting what happened to her. It's about refusing to let silence be the final word. And finally, remember to leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars if you like the show, or hell, even if you don't. But either way, feel free to let me know what you think. Please follow The Last Trip on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod, and subscribe on Patreon to support the show. You'll get extra research, videos, photos, and updates. And even learn more about my personal travels. That's patreon.com/thelasttrippodcast. I'm Jamie Beebe, bringing you your last trip and signing off until the next one. Thanks for listening.